This video shows how to use the Object Information REST APIs to retrieve data objects in Informatica Enterprise Data Catalog. Imagine we're data architects at a global accounting firm. Our team is asked to retrieve objects that match a certain criteria. We know the best way to retrieve catalog objects is to use the Object Information REST APIs in Enterprise Data Catalog. We'll get the job done using two REST APIs. The Data Objects API lists the catalog objects, and the Data Objects ID API lists the details for a specific object. Using the Data Objects API, we're tasked to retrieve the following catalog objects: the databases in a resource, the schemas in a database, the tables in a schema, the columns in a table, and the schemas, tables, and columns in a database. Before we begin, we'll have to create the search query that we'll use to retrieve the objects. We'll follow the Apache Lucene syntax to build our search query. Here's the syntax of our search query. And here's the class types for each of our objects. We also create the filter query to navigate through the asset hierarchy in a resource. Use the ID attribute to construct the filter query. For instance, to drill down to the table level, use the following syntax. Now let's begin by retrieving a list of the databases in a resource. Here's the search query we'll use for the request parameter. We'll start by logging into the Swagger user interface for Enterprise Data Catalog. Then we'll expand the Object Info section, select the Data Objects API, and click Try It Out. And here's where we'll enter our search query. You can enter values for other request parameters as required. Certain parameters, such as page size and include reference objects, are pre-populated with default values. Now we're ready to execute. Finally, scroll down to review the response. The catalog objects and their details are listed within the item's parameters. For more information about the response parameters, see the Enterprise Data Catalog REST API reference documentation. Now, let's move on to listing out the schemas in a database. Here's the search and filter queries we'll use for the request parameters. Back in Swagger, under the Object Info section, first we'll enter the search query. Then enter the filter query. After executing, we'll find the response below. Now we'll get the tables in a schema. Here's the search and filter queries we'll use for the request parameters. Again, using Swagger, we'll enter the search query, and then enter the filter query. Let's execute and copy the response below. Next, let's list out the columns in a table. Here's the search and filter queries we'll use for the request parameters. Now back to Swagger. Let's enter the search query, then the filter query, and execute to get the response. Finally, we'll need to list the schemas, tables, and columns in a database. Once again, here's the search and filter queries we'll use for the request parameters. Returning to Swagger, we'll enter the search query, then enter the filter query. Let's click Execute and get the response. Now let's use the Data Objects ID API to list the details for a specific object using the object's ID shown. Object IDs are unique IDs associated with each catalog object. You can get the object ID from the URL of the asset in the Asset Overview tab. Before we can proceed, we'll have to replace some special characters in the URL, as shown. Again, we'll go to the Object Info section, but this time we'll select the Data Objects ID API. Now let's enter the object ID of the data object, and then execute to get the response. And that's it! We've retrieved all the data we need for our project. In this video, we showed you how to use REST APIs to list catalog objects and list the details for a specific object. For more information, see the Enterprise Data Catalog REST APIs reference on the Informatica documentation portal, visit our communities and support hubs, or check out our website.